What's the creepiest thing that you've seen, but no one believes you? Story 1. So one day in law school, there's this girl with cat eyes always looking at me deep in my eyes during classes. During one of our eye contact sessions, a voice says to me, drop her a note telling her to meet you in your room during lunch break. So I passed the note. I went to my room forgetting I passed a note. I am in my bathroom, and I hear someone enter my room and lock the door. I thought it was my roommate. As I returned to the room, I saw the girl on my bed, her skirt rolled up and her legs wide open. She looks at me invitingly as I move towards her with an approving surprise on my face. In the course of a very intense moment, she whispers, "Worship me." My closed eyes quickly opened, and for a split second, her face changed. I almost froze. My mind blanked before I was even able to process what just happened. I screamed, "Jesus," and dashed out of the room. As I was panting on the veranda, an unfamiliar student passed me and touched my shoulder saying, "Brother, you are saved." Me and the girl never spoke again, and we just pretended like it never happened. The memory still haunts me. Story 2. I would love to tell you about an unsettling experience I had about 4 years ago in the fall. I was born in and still live in Lewisberry, Pennsylvania. My younger years were spent back near the old observatory around Moore's Mountain Road and Observatory Drive. Even then I could sense that area was a little off. The woods were just not quite right. Open fields seemed eerie. The roads never seemed to go the exact places you thought they did. Moore's Mountain Church boasted Spook Hollow, which was a logging road that just kind of ended and felt extremely unsettling. The decomposed body of a victim from a tragic crime out of Maryland was found in the trunk of a car out in that area. Lots of people talked about lights in the sky, strange noises, and other unusual phenomena. Many of the residences between the late S and early S were just plain strange. I saw my first geodesic dome house in that area, as well as lots of other peculiar types of housing. But let us get to the present. Most nights than not, I'll drive down to New Cumberland for a cold beer and some darts. And one night in October was no different. On a return trip, not long after midnight, I was en route headed east towards Lewisberry. As I was approaching John Brenneman's place up on the right, just before Brenneman Drive, I saw someone walking towards me along the side of the road. True, it was late, but it was rather mild for October, so it was not out of the question that someone might be walking along the road. What was odd is that he was quite tall, 6'6", or taller and really, really thin. In a few seconds, I was looking at him. I noticed that he seemed to be dressed all in black, with black pants, a tight black trench coat, very, very dark skin, and short dark hair. He was either limping or having trouble walking. As I debated slowing down, maybe someone had had an accident, he dropped down to all fours and quickly moved across the road in front of me. He had a face that was, as I said, coal black, with a cross between human and canine features. And then he was gone. When I got home, I had not really thought much about it, but over the next day or two, it really started to give me the creeps. I did not say anything to anyone for a few days, then told a few close friends. Being self-employed and fearing derision, I was hesitant to make much ado about it. Although I've always been an enthusiast of the paranormal, cryptozoology, ghosts, and such, I've always been a dyed-in-the-wool skeptic. However, I did receive some validation over the next couple of months. An officer in the Lewisberry Fire Company pulled me aside and mentioned that he too had seen something almost exactly the same a few months before my report while he was driving in the Observatory Drive region. This guy has a strong and stalwart public reputation, and I have never known him to be prone to exaggeration or lying. One of my closest friends who had mocked me over the experience also came to me about 6 months later. His own brother-in-law, who had not heard of my story, reported seeing something that exactly matched what I saw in terms of appearance, behavior, and gait. I cannot explain what I saw or begin to guess what it was. I only know I saw it, and it unsettles me. I do everything I can to avoid driving on route late at night, if I possibly can, and even when I drive it during the daylight, I am constantly scanning the sides of the road for something unusual. I did some research, and the closest I came to a picture was one like the Texas stilt walker, which I get shivers every time I look at it. Story 3. I lived in this really small town with an airport in Wisconsin. We have an airport in the back by the street I lived on, and we would see planes and all that normally. so I am familiar with how a plane or helicopter flies and sounds. So to start, it was roughly 7 years ago, and my brother, my neighbor, and I were outside late at night, probably around p.m. to midnight down in the detached garage by the highway. And we see this thing. It was a big red ball. And I mean, it literally looked just like a ball of light. The only way I can describe this thing is I thought it was a Chinese bag candle at first, but it was not. We all see this thing, and it is probably a mile away and roughly to feet up in the sky. And we see this thing come towards us. It is probably 1 mile away from us, and still just this ball of light. It came towards us, then back down the highway away from us, probably about a mile. Like it literally was coming towards us, got about 1/4 mile away, and just started moving away like in reverse instantly. It did not stop or turn around. It went forward and back, and it moved slow. It moved probably a mile, and just sat there like did not move up, down, left, or right. All of a sudden it shoots over across a factory, 2 cornfields, and over woods. It is now maybe 1/4 mile away from us above the woods, and it is right across the woods from us. Like a straight line from us to it, just the woods between us. It sat there for probably seconds floating above the woods and just slowly went down into the woods. And it made 0 sound. I mean nothing. If you did not see it, you would not have known it was there. Well, at this point, my heart is coming out of my chest, and my buddy brother and I are just staring at each other. Like, what was that? We went back in that woods for about 2 hours with flashlights and could not find anything. And I know these woods well. I kayaked the river back there, and I've been all over. And like I said, we did not find anything. Well, we go inside at this point, blown away and pretty freaked out. And we tell my buddy's aunt what happened. And she thought we were messing with her and we were high, which yes, but we would not have all seen this thing, whatever it was. Hands down, it was the most surreal thing I have ever seen. And honestly gives me goosebumps when I talk about it, because I do not know what it was or is. But I bet if you ask my buddy or brother, they could tell you the same story. Story 4, my fiancé believes me because he was there for it a lot of times and he was really weirded out by it too. Sorry, this could be a bit long. Sorry about formatting and whatever posting for mobile. So on a Friday, I ended up calling an ambulance for my dad. He had high blood pressure, was not taking his meds, and now had serious trouble breathing. It seemed to both of us to be a flare of his chronic bronchitis, but he refused to cooperate and let us take him to a doctor. I knew it was bad, so forget that he was going. I did not warn him because extreme emotion was not going to help him or me. I agreed with Dad that he should nap, packed a bag for my son to stay with his father, my fiancé, who is also a live-in caregiver, to his mom a bag for me, and set up meals for the pets for fiancé to dump into bowls without fiddling with mixing the different supplements they need. Then I called the ambulance. I knew we would be there overnight getting him stabilized, so I wanted it to be smooth for everyone with no panic. Well, it turned out that Dad was full of cancer and had no idea. He was short of breath the night before. That triggered a panic attack, and I was up the whole night with him rubbing his back and comforting him and then watching him to make sure he was only sleeping. In the early hours of Saturday morning, my dad passed away. I was with him to the end. After he had gone, and instructions were given on where to send his body, I called my fiancé to come back and get me. I sat with Dad until he got there and took me home to the house I had shared with my dad and my son. The next morning, there were things to do before I could bring my son back home. I got through all of it and held up well until we got back to my driveway. I fell totally apart and then in flew a wasp through the open window. Fiancé had his door open to bail when I screamed at the wasp in all my fury, "Get out." It did, immediately. And this happened every time I cried. A wasp would come, I would yell at it, it would go away, and I would no longer be crying because I was angry at the wasp. It got to the point where if it looked like I might cry, fiancé was running around closing doors and windows. Nobody else believes it, but we both lived it. And it is kind of freaky. Now it is winter, and I refuse to cry because I do not know what Dad will send since there are no wasps anymore. But thanks, Dad. Always there for me in life and apparently in death too. I have been blessed. Story 5. I have not had many odd experiences, but there was one incredibly strange thing when I was that still scares me. So for context, I have always been in online school due to having awful anxiety. My dad worked from AM to PM, only coming home during lunch. So I spent a lot of time on my own with just our pets. One day after I had just finished my schoolwork for the day, I was sitting in the kitchen with the cat in my lap making a sandwich. I had noticed some food had gone missing again, but it happened often, so I thought nothing of it. After a minute, I hear the dog start barking his head off outside, and at first it does not worry me because he's a loud dog and is probably just excited over some people walking down the street. But he keeps barking for around 5 minutes, and I notice he is snarling and growling and sounds aggressive, which is when I start to worry. So I finish my sandwich and go look out the glass back door to see what he is doing. He is looking at the shed with his teeth bared and his hair standing on end. I have never seen him act even remotely similar to this before, and I have not seen him like it since this incident. The shed window is covered with such a thick layer of dust and dirt. I cannot see anything inside, but I can make out a very faint silhouette of a very tall, wide person. I panic. I dash to the side of the house where I knew I could not be seen if they left the shed and snuck back into the house through my dad's bedroom window. I ran to his closet where I know he keeps a gun and hide there with it and my cat for what felt like the longest hour of my life. As soon as my dad got home for his lunch break, I told him what was happening and he made me give him the gun. Bandit the dog had settled down, but was still very intensely watching the shed. My dad tells me to stand way back, and I do not hesitate to listen. No way I wanted to be close to whatever was about to happen. So quietly he grabs the door handle and then flings it open and points the gun, and the shed is empty. Upon inspection, we found a cardboard box spilling over with food wrappers of things that had gone missing from our kitchen, 4 or 5 buckets full of human waste, a pair of boxers that did not belong to my dad or me, since I am a girl, in a very smelly dirt cake pillow. We called the police, and they confirmed it definitely looked like someone had been living in our shed. They said they had had another person find a similar thing in their garage a few years back, but had not heard anything else until now, which makes me wonder how long they must have been hiding here. We do not ever go to the area of the yard with the shed, and our dog had never been an outside dog until around a week before the incident. So he easily could have stayed there undetected for a long time. Anything could have happened to me, and he was never found. It still makes me paranoid to this day. Story 6. I used to walk to the bus every day for school when I was going to the community college. It was about an hour walk, and I would pass a wetlands area on the left. There are tons of coyotes in the area, which come pretty close to the residential areas. I have seen them walking down the streets at night a few times. Anyway, this day was in the fall, I think, when it was starting to get a little cooler, and there was a little bit of rain, but almost more like a mist. I always listened to music and sort of spaced out when I was walking to the bus. But this day, I felt compelled to watch the wetlands as I passed them. I saw a coyote, which was not unusual, but it felt weird or wrong to see it. It was pretty far away, but I stopped to watch it. It stopped and stared at me back, and I realized that something was completely off about the coyote. It had a human face, but it was really weird. Like if I try to focus on it, I cannot see any details, but I just knew it was a human face. Or like it had a coyote mask on, but I could see through it to its real face. We just stood there looking at each other for a while, and then I guess I just continued my walk. I do not know if it kept watching me, but I did not look back. I did not feel really scared, or anything, just uneasy like I was looking at something I was not supposed to. I still wonder if I will see it around again, and get a weird feeling every time I drive past that area. Story 7. Growing up, there were no street lights along the road my parents' house was on. I regularly walked everywhere since we lived on a mile-long island, and most friends lived at least a mile away. Most of the street going towards my folks' place was no big deal, but there was a section of the road about 2 yards before a driveway where I always got the creepiest feeling that something was watching me in the woods. While there were no streetlights and trees on both sides of the road for some reason, that section was especially dark feeling, which was funny as it had slightly less tree coverage than most of the rest of the road. So every time I would be walking home at night, I would sprint that last yards all the way to my parents' door and would not look behind me while doing it, while feeling this sense of dread that something was closing in on me. Did this pretty much throughout all my teenage years until I moved out of my folks' place. A few years ago, my family were sitting around trading spooky stories, and I brought up the thing in the woods I felt was watching me, figuring it was just my own mind acting up on me the whole time. All my siblings' faces turned white, and they all confirmed they had the same experience with that section of the walk home, and all described that same sense of darkness that was there and something right behind them as they ran. My parents laugh about it and think all of us are being silly. Story, so this one time when I was younger, maybe, or I was sleeping over at my cousin Steve's house. This was back when he had bunk beds because he liked making a little cave for himself. Well, that night, after we had gone to bed, me on the top bunk, him on the bottom bunk, I started to hear a weird sound coming from outside. It was like a soft whimpering moan. Steve heard it too, and he poked his head out from the bottom bunk, right as I poked my head out from the top. We looked at each other, and I asked him, "Did Aunt Becky leave Kimba the dog outside?" Steve shook his head and slowly got up to go look out the window. I climbed down from the top bunk and followed behind very slowly. When we looked outside, we saw this woman sitting down in the yard, slowly rocking back and forth, her head moving from side to side. She appeared to be hurt in some way. So I looked at Steve and said, "Should we get Uncle Roger?" Steve nodded his head, and we quickly ran down to my aunt and uncle's room. We knocked on the door, and my Uncle Roger came out in his pajamas. He looked at us and saw that we were scared. He asked what was wrong, and Steve said, "There's a lady in the yard. Dad, she is crying." At that point, Aunt Becky had woken up, and she and Uncle Roger quickly ran to the front door. We followed right behind them. When they opened it, there was no one there. Uncle Roger went out to the yard with a flashlight and started looking around. Then we heard a loud scream and a cry from Uncle Roger. He came running back to the house using shock language. He kept saying that something scratched him. He quickly pulled his shirt off, and right across his back was a big bloody handprint and 3 big scratches below it. Now, my grandma Rose was a medium. She passed away about a year ago, and my Aunt Becky quickly called her explaining everything that Steve and I saw, as well as what happened to Uncle Roger. Grandma Rose told us to lock every door cover, every reflective surface in the house, and light white candles in every room. She then told us to find some sea salt and to sprinkle some around the corners of the house, as well as the doors. After we did all that, she told us to sit tight and that she would be over soon. She got to their house in about minutes and quickly came inside. When she got there, she told us all to hold hands and stand behind her in a line. We did that, and she slowly opened the door. We heard the soft whimpering again, and Steve and I started to shake. But we did not let go of each other's hands. Grandma Rose slowly walked into the doorway and spoke these words, "This house is not yours. You are a lost spirit trying to find your way to the light. I can help you. Please let me help you." We all saw the woman slowly stand up and turn towards Grandma Rose. The woman then slowly started walking towards the house, her head still moving from side to side, and stopped right in front of the door. She looked up at my grandma and made a soft moaning sound, her teeth moving. Grandma looked at her and said, "I know you are hurting, young one. You were taken too soon by your vengeful husband, but you must know that he has passed on as well. He left this earth just as you shall. You are frightened. You do not want to leave yet. I know this, but it is time now. Please tell me your name." The woman stopped her head movement and stood up straighter looking at my grandma. And that is when I heard the most peaceful voice in the world say, "Kalani, my name is Kalani." We never talk about this story because we know how unusual it sounds, but my grandma really was a medium, and I really did watch her help a distressed spirit move on. I have some of my grandmother's gifts, including being able to see spirits from time to time and being able to sense when a room is off. My grandma used to always say to me, "Angels watch over you," right before she would kiss me on the forehead and go to her bedroom. And every time she did that, I would have good dreams. Now that she is gone, I have some very vivid bad dreams, but then I hear my grandma's voice softly whisper in my ear, "Angels watch over you, honey." And I feel her kiss my forehead, and the nightmares go away. So to everyone on here who has bad dreams and gets scared very easily, angels watch over you. Story 9. About 2 years ago, I was in Guatemala in the Zona Lemon area, visiting family in the back streets. It is pretty dim and dark during the evening. In night hours, it is also generally a dangerous place to be walking alone, so I always went out with others. Anyways, I was out with my 2 cousins getting a hamburger at this place, about 8 blocks away from our place. On our way back, it was dark out and there was not much moonlight. We took the back streets, since it would lead us directly to our front door, And since we know everyone in the small town, we did not have any worries of anyone bothering us. Plus, the streets were pretty empty already, since it just rained. About 3 blocks away from our place, I started to hear some footsteps behind us, but I did not pay much attention to it. I figured it was a stray dog following us, because we had some food. As we kept walking and joking around, my cousin mentioned the dog was following us. My older cousin told us not to worry. It probably just wants food. So he dropped some of his fries as we walked. As we kept walking, the footsteps behind us did not let up and did not stop for the fries. So it was already kind of hard to see that far ahead of us. As we start calling out to this dog to shoo away and leave us be, it stands up to about a little over 3 feet tall and starts to stagger towards us from the shadows of the block. My older cousin starts to tell us to back away, and the creature starts to get closer until it is close enough to make out some features and details. I had never been so scared in my life when we saw it. Whatever it was, it had eyes similar to a cat that glimmers in the night, and did not look natural walking on its hind legs. Kinda had fur, but was more like one of those hairless dogs with a little fur scattered, so I guess like an animal with mange. Either way, it was frightening enough for my younger cousin to just start running back home, and my older cousin and I followed quickly. We heard the animal running after us for a bit, but it disappeared once we got close to our place. My uncle was outside smoking when he saw us running frantically to the door. After we told him what we saw, he told us about a local legend of some creature that lives in that area that pretty much matched the description of what we saw. I cannot remember the name, but it is apparently a common thing to see over there. Either way, I have told people this story, and most think I am joking or something, and few believe me. I have never ran so fast and full of fear in my life. Sometimes I will bring it up with my cousins whenever I see them, and they remember instantly the dread that filled us when we finally saw it. Story when I had just turned me, my dog, and my dad went on a backpacking trip in northern Wyoming. Now the mountain range we were on is big. They say there are parts of the mountain humans had never stepped foot on. We planned an 8-mile trip. It would have been about 7 days. The first day went smoothly, got about 9 miles in and set up camp. The next day was a lot harder. We were not making very good time. The bushwhacking was getting harder and harder. In an attempt to cut off a few miles, we decided to take a little shortcut. Now this is not really a good idea, as it is easy to get lost. And the grizzly bear population in northern Wyoming is one of the biggest in the United States. But we both packed a pistol on us just for that reason. My dad carried a Smith & Wesson double action .magnum, and I carried a Ruger single action .magnum. It is a cattleman's pistol, and we both had grain buffalo slug rounds. So it is quite a punch, and it is loud as well. As we cut across this flat full of thick bushes and trees, we came across an open field, maybe yards across with one big tree in the middle of it. So we walk over to the tree to eat lunch as we get closer to it. I can see things hanging from the tree. We get up to take a look, and there are dog legs hanging from branches, still had wet blood on them. So they could not have been there long. We started to panic and got out of there as fast as we could. That night we set up our tent and went to bed. I woke up around a.m. to my dog growling, ready to fight. His hair was standing straight up like a mohawk. And I'm thinking it is probably an animal walking around out there getting a drink from the creek. So I try to go back to sleep as I lay my head down. I hear whispers and the hair on my neck stand straight up. My dog is upset now, so I tap my dad on the head to wake him up. We sat there for about minutes. We could hear the whispers getting closer, and we were starting to get really scared. A branch snapped a little ways away as soon as we hear that my dad opened the door to the tent and fired a shot straight up in the air, and everything went silent. Not a sound. So we sat there awake all night as the sun came up. I guess I dozed off when I woke up. My dad was getting everything packed up, and I asked him if he slept at all. He got confused, so I said all that stuff last night. He acted like he had no clue what I was talking about. I got upset and told him he fired a shot in the air. And that is when he got upset and pulled out all his ammo and said I left the truck with rounds. That is a box of and his cylinder full. He counted out the rounds right in front of me. Yes, of them. So thinking, am confused, I get all my stuff packed up as I put on my gun belt. My dad asked what I took a shot at and pointed to an empty slot on my belt. It was full when I went to bed, and I never took a shot. That is when we both looked at each other and decided we were calling it quits. We packed up and hiked miles back to the truck, got there around 1 in the morning, and drove to the closest town and stayed in a motel. I think my dad knows what happened, but did not want me to believe it. He will not talk about it when I bring it up, and he will not ever hike that mountain again. Story: I was at work at a well-known pub chain doing the cleaning in the morning at around a.m. At this point, the only people in the building were me, my manager, and the kitchen manager, who were both outside the front of the pub. When doing the cleaning upstairs, I always prop open the toilet doors, 2 doors for both males and females toilets, so that I can't hear anybody coming. At this point, I was in the ladies' toilets using chemicals to clean them when I hear a knock on the toilet door and the chair scrape on the tile floor, as if somebody had knocked it when they walked past. I come out of the cubicle I was in and say morning, as I thought it was the other cleaner coming in. I get no reply, so decide to walk around the corner to the door where I could see who it was, and there was nobody there. As I'm stood at the door, I hear footsteps on the tile floor near the cubicles. I walk downstairs to see if anybody else has come in the pub or if the other cleaner has arrived. And as I'm walking down the stairs, I hear a huge smash like glass breaking. My manager and the kitchen manager hear this from the front door and come running to me to see what has happened. We all go upstairs to the ladies' toilets, where one of the huge floor-to-ceiling mirrors had smashed like completely cracked in half, and the top half had smashed all over the floor. We all stand there wondering how it had happened. When we noticed wet handprints on the mirror itself and on the wall surrounding the mirror leading from the sink. Nobody else we have told this story to believes us. And since then, we always go in twos to the toilets whenever we need to. Story: when I was about 5 or 6, and it was late at night. I woke up in the middle of the night to find my room tinted green and a giant scary monster standing in the middle of my bedroom. I bolted past him and down my upstairs hallway, which was tinted dark blue. I ran down into my basement where I thought I would be safe, but the monster appeared at the bottom of the stairs, and now the whole basement was tinted red. I ran to the far side of the basement where I was cornered. This was the most terrified I have ever felt in my whole life. Cornered in the basement of my house, which looked like a scene from Ghost Hunters, except the light was red instead of green, and a huge monster was coming for me. Desperate, I vaulted the couch in the far side of the basement, sprinted past the monster, and ran back up the 2 flights of stairs and down my blue-tinted hallway while screaming, "Daddy, Daddy." I ran back in my green-tinted room and got under my covers, watching my door in terror. After a few seconds, the monster entered, closing in slowly. Just as he approached the foot of my bed, my dad came in and swung an axe at his back, stopping it. He stood there with the axe for a bit, and then the light went from green to its normal color, and the axe and the monster both disappeared. My dad said, "Are you all right?" And I thought it was a dream at first, but I had not woken up from anything. I was in the same position in the bed, and my dad was standing in the same place in the same way, wearing the same worried expression that he had been a few seconds before. The whole thing was a hallucination with an unknown cause, and I have not experienced anything anywhere close to it to this day. Story: I used to volunteer at a zoo, and one of the things I got to do was help host overnight stays where primary to high school age kids and their teachers would camp out at the zoo overnight and have interactive educational sessions with us over 2 days. The zoo has a section that is pretty much a modern single-story house that is designed to show people how to live green-friendly and integrate nature with urban life. Think veggie garden, compost, recycled water, electricity, saving, looking after native wildlife, etc. When school groups stayed, we would all go to this house, show them some native animals, and talk about conservation before setting them up on sleeping bags in the lounge room overnight while we slept in other rooms in the house. The doors and windows all lock so that none of the kids goes wandering off through the zoo in the dark. Anyway, it is around lights off time, 9 p.m., and this little 8-year-old comes and finds myself and another host. He points at the windows and says, "Excuse me, but can we let the lady in?" Myself and this other host head count the room to figure out who was locked out. Everyone is here. Maybe he has seen a security guard. We ask him which lady, and he replies the keeper lady with the stripes on her face. She wants to come in. I am amused, but the other host, who is in her early 40s, looks a little shaken. She nicely tells him we will look after it and send him back to the school group. A while later, when U.S. hosts are chilling out in our room, she tells the group about the kid, and I learn why she looks so spooked. Apparently, a female keeper was injured by a tiger at the zoo in the S, and she later passed from her injuries in hospital, not on the zoo grounds. The host I was working with was extra spooked because one of her colleagues had told her that an overnight kid had once asked, "Why is the lady with the scratched face standing in the dark a year or so earlier?" Not sure I believe in ghosts, but I will admit it was pretty unsettling, and I still wonder how two kids could come up with the same imagined person. Story: this happened sometime between and in Whitmore, Michigan. I'm not sure exactly what year it was. I just know where I lived at the time, so that narrows it down to that window of time. I was sitting in the backyard of the apartment complex that my Nana lived in, and my dad was sitting outside with me. It was full nighttime, very dark, and we were just sitting around talking and looking at the stars. My dad stops me in the middle of my sentence and asks me if I saw that. I asked what, and he pointed out this group of what looked like green stars. There were 3 of them in the sky, not very far apart. I could tell that my dad was unsettled by seeing them, so I was a little bit worried, but I did not figure it was any big deal. As we watched, more and more of these green stars started appearing in the sky. We were counting them as they appeared, and we got up to or before they started moving in squares. All of these green stars started moving rapidly in perfect squares. They did this for just about a minute and a half before they all disappeared simultaneously. I have no idea what I saw, and I have mentioned it to a few people, and none of them have ever seen anything like that, and they do not believe me or think that I might have been mistaken. My dad even told my mom about it himself, and she said that she thought we must have been mistaken. Of course, my dad has always struggled with alcohol, so the word of someone who drinks did not really help my case. I know what I saw, though. I think about it a lot and wonder what it could have been. I mentioned it to my dad recently, and he does not even remember it. But again, he has always struggled with alcohol. I was not even a little kid at the time. I was at least possibly or story. The older I get, the creepier this becomes as I realized just how real it was. It was 4th grade and on a field trip to the Whaley House, which is the most haunted house in America. There were maybe of us children inside, looking into all the rooms, reading the spooky history and asking questions. I had gone upstairs and was looking into the little girl's room. There was a bed, a chair, and a ball on the ground. The ball on the ground moved back and forth a few times completely on its own. Being a little girl myself, and having seen far too many scary movies, I assumed this was a trick by the tour guides hosting us at the house. I was not the only one who had seen objects move and felt strange gusts of cold air in the house. There were maybe 4 to 5 of us in total who did, and we all talked about it and joked that it was just a hoax. All of the parents and teachers with us insisted there were no tricks going on, and that we must be joking the adults thinking we were kids and were being silly. The only person to seem disturbed by this was our tour guide. Once she heard that a few of us had an experience upstairs, she immediately asked all of us to gather up downstairs outside and simply continue the guide from the front steps. At the end, she asked which one of us had seen anything move or felt anything while in the house, and the small few of us raised our hands. She took us aside and asked each one of us what happened, and simply said she does not have an explanation, but that we should not let it affect our tour. At the time, I had no idea how serious or creepy the house truly was, and that there is absolutely no way the ball was able to move on its own, nor did anyone actually take the 4 to 5 of us seriously. Story: when I was a freshman in high school, I was home alone with just my dogs one night. It was probably midnight or later, and I was sitting on my couch texting in a group chat. Without hearing any footsteps, I hear the screen door outside our wooden door creak open deliberately, not fast like a storm would force it open. Petrified of what someone could want at this hour, I wait for a knock that never came. Shortly after, I see the doorknob jiggle very gently and quietly. Both of my dogs are staring at the door, but not barking. I furiously text my group chat that I think someone is trying to get into my house, but none of us could drive at the time, and it was a school night. Out of the corner of my eye, I see the blinds halfway open on the window next to the front door. Since we have steps outside our front door, our window is a good 8 feet off the ground and too far from the door to lean over and look into. I see a face in the window. I am horrified and just try to avoid looking over there. The face did not move for hours and I sat paralyzed on the couch holding my dogs and too scared to call anyone. At some point that night, I passed out on the couch and woke up once it was light out. A couple weeks later, we went to the window next to the couch I slept on to put an air conditioner unit in it, and there were weirdly long handprints on it that looked like they were trying to force the window up and open from the outside. Story: a couple months ago on a Saturday night, I had a dream about my parents' house back east. It was winter, and I was at home with my younger sister. Everything was fine for a while, and then we were both suddenly aware there was a dangerous person in the house. In the dream, we owned these two big furry dogs that I think were German shepherds. I opened the sliding glass door to the outside porch, and in the snow, one of the dogs was laying injured with its head cut off. The other one was understood to also have been harmed. Some other things happened in the dream that I cannot understand the relevance of. But for most of the dream, I was running around trying to protect my younger sister and find the dangerous person. At the very end of the dream, I walked upstairs to find the person sleeping in my sister's bed. The dream zoomed into his face, and people always talk about how you cannot make up a new face in your dreams. But it was the face of some unsettling white guy I have never seen before in my life. And I saw his face even as I woke up terrified. The following Monday morning at work, I was scrolling through Twitter and started seeing posts about that attacker in San Francisco that was presumed to be a white supremacist and harmed those two black sisters and their friends. He injured the younger sister, and she passed away while her older sister was attempting to save her. When they showed a picture of the suspect's face, it was the man in my dream sleeping in my younger sister's bed. Story: I was an LDS missionary in a small Eastern European country called Moldova back, and a woman from our congregation invited my colleague and I over to help her weed her garden. So we went over, helped weed the garden, and then went inside her apartment to drink some tea and eat some soup. After eating the lunch and exchanging some pleasantries, my colleague and I were about to leave when the woman asked us to give her a priesthood blessing. We thought maybe she was physically ill and needed a blessing for her health. But then she explained over the past few days she felt that there was some negative presence with her all the time, and whenever she would go out in public, like to a grocery store, she would randomly stop what she was doing and start yelling at random passerbys. She said that she would start yelling at them, telling them horrible things about themselves, even though she did not know them. This obviously frightened her, and she was looking for help. My colleague and I were both naive year-olds and thought she was confused, even though we knew she was the coolest, most sane person we knew. So we agreed to share our spiritual strength in the name of Jesus Christ in order to cast out any negative presence in the apartment. My colleague raised his right hand in a degree angle and called out any harmful presence in the apartment to leave in the name of Jesus. After he did so, we both felt this odd sensation that we were being mocked. The feeling felt like someone laughing at me saying, "Ha, you guys cannot do it. I'm still here, haha." At this point, the woman asked us to perform the casting out on her, not the apartment, since she would feel the presence no matter where she went. We agreed. So my colleague put his left hand on her head while he raised his right arm again, calling out in the name of Christ to any harmful presence, and her to leave. Then things got strange. During the ceremony, I had my eyes open, and after my colleague said these words, I literally saw some sort of dark shadow blob leave the woman and then try to attach itself to my friend. After a moment hovering on him, it moved away as if frustrated it could not get in. Then it moved to me. I saw it coming and then literally felt it as it pressed up against my chest. What I saw and felt can only be described by the static image and noise coming from an analog television that is not connected to a station. And the force of this entity was strong. Not enough to push me to the ground, but I felt immense pressure on my chest. Then a moment later, I could see it leave me and then fly out the window. Instantly, there was a sense of peace and relief in the room. The woman said she finally felt at peace and thanked us. It was only after that my friend told me that during the second attempt, he did not see anything, but felt a surge of some sort of electricity or power go up his arm and then leave him. I had been a believing Christian in angels and demons before that day, but then I knew there were interdimensional forces out there that sometimes cannot be explained, but only believed. Story: I grew up in a small town in Kansas, United States. My family and I lived in a small house that was built in the S. The back and front of the house laundry room and one bedroom in the back and the living room, dining room, and one bedroom in the front were added on through the years. The initial house was nothing but a kitchen, bathroom, and a bedroom. One night, when I was about years old, I had my best friend over for a sleepover. We, of course, stayed up late playing games and then crashed on the living room floor, which had a direct line of sight from the front to the back of the small house, with the kitchen in the middle. Do not remember anything out of the ordinary while falling asleep, but I distinctly remember waking up with a gripping sense of fear, immobilizing my whole body. I did not have a nightmare or anything, but my body sensed something was not right. I remember slowly turning my head to look down the hallway of my house, and I saw a young man, maybe in his early standing in my kitchen. I was the oldest child in the family, so it was not any of my siblings. I instantly stopped breathing, but my heart kept racing as I thought of what I should do. I blinked multiple times, hoping that it was just my sleepiness that was conjuring up this image in my brain. But he never went away. Then I noticed something odd. The moonlight was shining through the kitchen window, and as it fell on a young man, he seemed to be shrouded in a sort of bluish haze, which I thought was odd. But there he was, just standing there in my kitchen, staring at the bedroom door. The bedroom that was part of this house from the beginning, and my bedroom. I slowly but consciously raised the blanket over my head and prayed that he did not notice me. After what felt like an eternity under the covers, I mustered up enough gut to give a peek again. I was secretly hoping he would be gone, or at worst had not noticed me and would not be standing over me. But sure enough, he was still there, standing in the kitchen in the same position, staring at my bedroom door. It was then that I noticed that he was wearing super old clothing, like costumes you see from era film. He was not dressed fancy, but in more of a poor man's look, and he even had the classic tattered newsboy cap. I lay there for another 2 minutes, hardly blinking once to make sure he would not advance towards me. But he never did, just stood there staring at my bedroom. I eventually fell asleep due to pure exhaustion and then woke up in the morning. The feeling of fright and danger I had felt when I woke up during the night was immediately gone, and I honestly thought I was maybe dreaming, even though I knew I was not. But here's the weirdest part. I spoke with my best friend later that day about what I saw, and he replied, "No way. Woke up last night and saw him too." It was at that moment that I knew someone tied to this house almost years ago had come to visit Story. When I was in 6th grade, we were in the middle of math class working on something, and all of a sudden, all of us only kids just sat up simultaneously. We were all still for like 3 seconds and then started looking at each other still without talking. I still have no idea what actually happened, but we all felt it. It felt like the air was somehow vibrating. And when I asked my friend later, he also had the same feeling of low, rumbling chill in his spine. About 5 seconds into it, the teacher finally realizes something is going on and looks up to see kids all looking at each other in complete silence. I remember a deep feeling in my guts that somehow resembled a déjà vu. But unlike the normal déjà vu, it did not feel like it happened to me before, but to someone else who was both me and not me. Then the teacher asked, "Is everything okay?" And all of a sudden, all of us gasped and started talking all together. Later on, we all collectively reasoned that it had to have been a small earthquake, because those are not unheard of where we lived, and the teacher was old and probably did not feel anything. When we asked the second class next to us if they felt the earthquake, none of them had any idea what we were talking about. Later that day, I told my dad about the small earthquake we felt, and as I described the sensation to him, he became very quiet. He then asked me if we were on the 2nd floor on the second class to the right, which is exactly where we were. Now we live in a very tightly knit community neighborhood. So I went to the same school as my dad, and most of my friends were the kids of my dad's friend from the neighborhood. Years ago, when my dad went to the same school, the exact same thing happened to his class, with the exact same feeling of experiencing someone else's déjà vu who was both you and not you. Story: I was about 9 years old. Do not remember the exact age, but my mom got me a cardboard house that you can build and draw on from Toys R Us. I was really happy because I love making tiny spaces for me to hang out in, like making pillow forts, etc. So I painted the house and furnished it, putting blankets and pillows, etc. This cardboard house had a chimney in the door. I absolutely hated sleeping alone because I was so terrified of ghosts, But that day I was excited to sleep in that house thing, and I felt safe in it, so I slept alone that night. My sleeping position was with my head next to the door. As I was trying to sleep, it took forever for me to sleep. I started hearing a rattling noise outside my house. Before I go on further, I need to explain. Imagine hearing a floating rattlesnake shaking its rattle or a floating maraca shaking. It was not a bug or anything. I could tell by the way it moved around. It was as if sound itself was floating around me, moving sound. It was really weird, like an entity that emitted sounds. So this floating rattle ghost entered through the chimney and floated smoothly next to my right ear, then legit went over my face to the other ear and floated out the door. Cannot stress enough how smoothly it glided around the space, unlike any bug. It continued floating around, making a rattle noise for a while longer, and I was so scared I could not open my eyes, and I forced myself to sleep as tears ran down my cheeks. It sounds lame and not scary, but it was. Just imagine sound itself floating around you, as if there was an invisible maraca shaking. Next morning, I woke up with half my body dragged out of the house. Story, I remember this so clearly, like it was yesterday. I was around 2 years old and lived in a little cottage. Most nights, a man would appear in my room dressed as a kind of Batman and take my dummy pacifier out of my mouth or point at me. I would immediately start crying and he would disappear. And my mom used to find on the other side of the room in similar places, obviously a distance away from my bed. My mom said a few months later, I used to come to the top of the stairs from my bed and say there was a man upstairs, or, as I was young, just kept saying a man and crying, and upon inspection, she would find nothing. We spoke about it a few years later as I got older, and she said she found out a man who lived there before he used to dress up for children at fundraising events as a superhero and had passed away in the house. I seriously believe him to be some sort of ghost. He was kind of faded and dark, but the edges of his silhouette would be vivid with a kind of blue shine. He would either appear beside me or come through the bunk bed nearby. I am MIS now and still remember the details. My memories of this time of my life are so clear, which I believe as a child is something you may not remember so clearly, but I could literally remember every detail. My youngest memory in this house is being washed as a baby in the sink by my mom and reaching out and touching her stomach. She then pushed my hand back into the water. No one really believes I can remember this so clearly, but I really do. Story, my dad told me this story about the scariest thing he ever saw, and no one believes him other than my uncle, his best friend from way back. Now, my dad is disabled, but back in the day before his accident, he was a huge guy built like a brick house, ex-military and ex-biker, covered in tattoos, no, just a big tough dude. So they went out camping when Dad had time off from the army. So he was used to going bush and dealing with all the stuff that comes with hiking it through the Australian bushland in almost pitch black. As I said, he was not scared of much. They set up their tents and spent the afternoon fishing. They caught a decent amount and did that thing, where they leave the fish in the water overnight so they do not get nasty or whatever. After they both went to bed and made sure everything was secure and, safe, and fell asleep. A few hours later, my dad hears trees snapping. Something huge is moving around in the bushland around their camp, which is right on a lake. Army training kicks in, and Dad is awake and aware in seconds and slowly opens his tent very slowly, just enough so he can see. And while doing that, he hears water splashing, and it was loud apparently. Dad looks out and sees this huge creature hunched over at the net in the water, pulling fish out and eating them. He assumed it was eating them. It was dark. Now Dad is like 6'3" and built back then, as I said earlier. And he said this thing was at least twice his size and just scary to look at. My uncle heard the splashing and thought it was Dad and yelled out for him to be quiet. This creature's head snaps around like a predator towards the other tent and kind of just sits hunched for a few minutes before lumbering out of the water and towards the tents. Dad is shaking because there is this huge creature outside the tent, and he does not have his rifle or anything because, taking weapons camping here is not a big thing. This thing gets closer and closer to Dad's tent, and he just scoots to the very back of the tent and sits dead still. This thing apparently grabbed at the tent and shook it a bunch, not sure why, but it did, and after a few more minutes it went away. Dad could hear it breaking stuff as it walked away. He did not sleep much that night. Once the sun was up, he went out to look at the net, and it was completely torn open, and there were fish scales and blood. My uncle woke up and asked my dad what he had done to their fish. Dad was just dumbstruck and looked around the campsite to see all the underbrush and smaller plants flattened and snapped. They left later that day, and Dad refused to go back to that area ever again. I mean, he stands by to this day that it was a Yowie Australian Bigfoot. And what made it more believable to me was the fact that he was not like it had glowing eyes, because that is the biggest thing everyone says. And it is really hard to believe. Dad just said it was huge and dark and ruined their fishing stuff. Story in my freshman year of high school around my grandma on my dad's side passed away abruptly. Things get weird instantly. My grandma died a day after my great aunt dies, almost to the hour. That was the first thing that strikes me as weird. My grandma was suffering from the effects of having a stroke, so she could not move her legs and left side of her face. When my grandma found out that my great aunt died, she was quiet the entire day. My cousin, who was staying with my grandma in her room around bedtime, told me, since I was at my own house, that my grandma refused to let my cousin go to sleep in my grandma's room. They argued, and my cousin gave in and slept in the living room. That morning, my grandma died with her eyes open, looking at the left side of her bed. Those were the first few things that were weird. Fast forward to after the funeral, my family traveled to Lancaster, California for the funeral of my great aunt and grandma. They were buried right next to each other, but we got home early morning around 9 in the morning, and we were all just emotionally and physically exhausted. We all spent the day unpacking and just relaxing. Nighttime comes around, and me and my cousin are just watching television in the living room, where my younger sister's play kitchen is that they got a month before for their birthday. As me and my cousin were watching television, the kitchen kept playing sound effects, the tea kettle whistling or the sink running water. At first we thought it was the batteries, so I took them out. Even though I found it really weird since the toy was only a month old, the batteries should not have been acting up like that. About an hour passes, and my cousin and I just played off the weirdness until the kitchen makes the noises again. And at first I did not know what to do. The battery was sitting right in front of us in the coffee table. I made sure that I took out all the batteries since I was the one who put them in. My cousin and I tried ignoring it until the noises became unrelenting. No one else was hearing them, which is weird because my bedroom was right behind the living room, only separated by a wall. That was it. My cousin shifts up in the couch and asks Granny, and the tea kettle goes off. Then my cousin says, "If you were Granny, do the tea kettle 3 times. The tea kettle went off once, then twice. And after a few more seconds, a 3rd time each time, cutting the sound off to start over. I was terrified, as was my cousin, but we started asking my grandma questions. Like, is my great aunt with her? And is she okay? Stuff like that. She would answer the questions. Yes, with the tea kettle, and then no, with the running water. As we were asking questions, I wanted to make sure that it really was my grandma talking, so I asked again if it really was her. We got a yes, but this one was short, very short compared to the others. The tea kettle whistle ended almost as soon as it started, which was weird, but it was a yes. So my cousin gets up to tell my dad, who was asleep down the hall. My dad comes into the living room and starts asking questions, but he was not getting a reply to any of his questions. He gets up very sad because it looked like he wanted to believe us, but he looked hurt that we could have been making this up. He left back to his room, and me and cousins sat there looking at the kitchen set, and I asked again, "Are you my granny?" We waited for about 5 minutes until the sound of running water happened. My cousin and I were terrified because if we really were talking to a spirit, then we do not know what we were talking to. My cousin and I left my room, and we fell asleep, and we have not ever talked about that night again. The kitchen set never went off again after that night. And whenever I hear the noises, I make sure that it is just my younger sisters playing with it and not something else. But thankfully, we only had the kitchen set for about another couple of months since the girls broke most of it and my dad tossed it. Story: I was raised for a few years by an uncle and aunt, eventually moving back with my parents when they had been deemed fit. A few years after living with my parents, maybe 2 or less, he died. A month after he died, my aunt wanted me to start sleeping over a week and a month. I did. Felt bad. I was not around when he died. The first night, I slept over. I let the dogs out. When it was time for them to come back in, I opened the door and called for them. When it did not come back in, I stepped into the yard. Both dogs who had known my uncle in life were sat perfectly still and quiet. Looking up at my uncle, it was dark nighttime, but I could see him perfectly clear. He glowed with a bright aura, as if he was in a perfectly lit room and someone had cut him out and pasted him into the night. I did not know what to do. I went inside to grab a pen flashlight I had found earlier that day, went back out with it, and he was gone. I should have stayed and said something, but I was a kid and was stunned. I lived in a notoriously haunted small town during my middle and high school years. The whole town is known to be built on indigenous remains. The remains used as property markers when the town was founded, and a lot of it is haunted. The house we lived in, I believe, had 4 ghosts. The cat, the girl, the woman, the man. Unsure if they died at the same time or not. The cat, a while after we moved in, I saw a cat in my room. He had the weird state of being completely solid, yet also translucent. He would walk around my room at times, sometimes walking between my legs or nuzzling my legs. I woke up one day because something was sitting on my face. I could breathe fine, but felt the fur on my face. The most surreal time, he was sat in my window. Full moon out, I could see the moon and the woods through him while seeing him as well. The girl, this is the one I am most unsure about because I only had one experience. Behind our house was a gravel road that went to everyone's driveways as they were in the back of the houses. I walked it dragging a jump rope behind me, and suddenly it was like I was someone else. I was shorter, wearing an antiquated dress, shoes, and frilly socks. The cornfield, which should have been to my left, was an empty natural field as opposed to farmed. The deck that was a recent addition was not on our house anymore. I saw an old Ford-type car. I did not know how else to explain it. Creak and roll towards me, pull into the driveway. I was snapped out of it, back to where I was in real time. The woman, she would rearrange the kitchen. Mostly our salt and pepper shakers. Cannot remember what exactly else she did. I know she had a different feel when she was around. She did more stuff that my mom noticed than I did. The man, he was the worst. He was mean. He threw everything in our basement around once, making a huge mess. I first noticed him when I took a picture with my phone. It was dark. I had just gotten my first phone with a camera and was taking pictures of random things. The doorway that led from the dining room to the kitchen and bedroom. And first floor bathroom I took a picture of. And in the doorway picture, we could see a shadow of a man standing there. It was all black, no features. When he was around, you could feel it. His presence was dark, though again, it was years ago. I'm getting fuzzy on the details. We were leaving one day to go to visit my father. I was stood at the top of the stairs. I felt large hands on my back. I cried out, my brother's name, as he was the only man in the house. I was convinced it was him. I was pushed and fell to the bottom of the stairs, fracturing my wrist. I looked up and no one was there. My sisters all stood at the bottom looking at me like I had 2 heads. We hear the toilet flush and my brother walks out of the first floor bathroom. I know I was pushed. I felt the hands on my back. Anyway, that is all stuff no one believes me about. I also saw a UFO in that same house. I was looking out my window. There was a bright light in the woods behind the house. Was thinking there was a fire in the woods. As it came closer, I realized it was a ship. Circular like a moon pie, had windows around the middle and like a ring, though I could not see inside because the lights were too bright. And then it silently flew over my house and over the town.